This is Women Ending War, the podcast where you'll discover that there is another path, that peace is possible, and that the women here can lead the way. I'm Dr. Ilana Stockman. I'm here with Eva Dalek, my co-host. Welcome. Assalamu alaikum, Eva.
Shalom aleichem, Ilana.
How are you today?
I'm good. Very excited about the discussion on youth and leadership.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, me too.
Very timely, very timely.
Very timely. Everybody's curious what's going on with the youth. How the youth are dealing with the situation and with war and peace. There was a very inspiring video going around recently with a song from the Jerusalem youth choral group that was on Americans Got Talent, singing Home. Mm-hmm. My home. Mm-hmm. It was very, very inspiring. I encourage everybody to watch it.
I think also a lot of we think of soldiers not as youth, but many of the Israeli soldiers are actually 18 years old.
Yeah.
That's when they are drafted. And that's really an interesting fact to add to the mix, because they just finished school and they have their whole world open for them. And instead, Israel just shut it off and draft them into the army and get them in this new completely reality that is disconnected of what a young man and woman should be doing.
Right. It's really hard to have this conversation in Israel. Army is such a sacred cow, you know, but it is such an impressionable age and such a vulnerable age. And, you know, I actually really worry about, you know, all the 20-somethings. I mean, you know, I have 4 kids. My oldest is 31 and my youngest is 20. So they're all in that cohort, and they also have partners and they have friends, and they've all been affected in different ways. I don't want to speak on their behalf. I don't want to, you know, their stories are theirs to share. But I can just say, like, as a mother observing the 20-somethings, I have a lot of worries. I have a lot of worries about where all of this war and violence is going to be taking us for, you know, a generation, if not more. So these points of optimism, of hearing about things that are taking place, actions that people are taking on behalf of youth, that's, you know, really, really important. Okay, should we get started?
Yeah.
All right, let's get started with our guest today. I'm really excited to have here Nofar Drukman. Hi, Nofar.
Hi.
Nofar is project director of peace activism for Peace Now, and a longtime peace activist herself, involved in many initiatives, including the New Story Leadership, which we're going to hear about. And she has her own WhatsApp group called Peace Opportunities, which I also want to hear about. So, Nofar, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me.
So tell us about how you, and also we forgot to mention that you're the mother of Yali, right?
Speaking of youth, like right now he's 3 years old, but still, it's starting from a very young age.
Yeah. So how did you become a peace activist?
Ooh. It's a good question.
Or why? How or why?
How and why? So speaking of starting in a very young age, I remember when Rabin was assassinated. I was on the second grade, and I knew that something horrible happened, and it's going to change everything. But the thing that I didn't know politics. I knew nothing about the news. Like my dad passed away a month ago, and he really liked watching the news and hearing about everything. He really wanted to hear about everything, and so the TVs were around me all this time, and I remember it happened, and I knew that something significant happened. And I think since then, I knew in some way that I'm going to handle with the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. I don't think I said it specifically like the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, but I knew that this issue, that to promote peace. I remember myself as like the first grade student, just drawing a dove with an olive leaf, and writing the word shalom, peace. So it was so common. I guess many people here in Israel participate, they had the same experience if they are around my age, 36. So yeah, like in my generation, it was quite common. But I didn't like politics. I didn't like hearing the news all time, because again, at my home, my parents heard it all the time. So I wanted to escape it. I wanted to do something else.
It's very noisy. It's sort of like the background noise of Israel. You get into a taxi and it's all of the, loud chatter all the time, and you put on the television, it's loud and it's a lot of yelling. It is a very noisy background to Israeli culture.
It is. And I think specifically for women, it's like, oh, come on, they're making a lot of noise, and why do I need it? Maybe I will go to something else. So when I grew up, it was during the Second Intifada. I remember myself having this fear from hearing Arabic, just because I didn't know any Arabs at all. Although I live in the center of Israel, like near Tel Aviv, so Jaffa was just near me, but I never had Palestinian friends, for instance. But still, I had this feeling that, okay, I know that at some point I'm going to be involved in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, but it's not the right time. So let's put it aside, not now. So I continued. And I was a social entrepreneur from a very young age, since the age of 16. And but again, it's not the right time, to tackle it. It's all about the news and politics. It's not for me. So I just kept on my track of social entrepreneurship and innovation. And at some point, so it was about and I served in the army, and in the army I saw Palestinians, but again, it was not equal. So I couldn't say that, okay, I met Palestinians. Right. Okay.
Well, it's hard to say in general that people in the army are seeing Palestinians as,
it's really...
It's human beings even.
It's different. It's different because there is a lot of fear. And I can understand this fear. Okay. I think from both sides there is fear. Also for the Palestinians, if they see me as a soldier or as a commander in the army. So there will be a lot of fear. And for me, the same. I remember one time when I was in the army and a Palestinian, and I saw a Palestinian car coming towards me, and it shouldn't be there. Okay. So my heartbeat went up dramatically.
Right. Well, we're taught fear. I mean, we are very purposely taught fear. We're taught to dehumanize the other. We're taught to fear the other, to distance the other, to put up barriers. We're very specifically taught that. And all of that noise of all that politics that you're talking about, the political discourse, it works to do that to us also, to otherize and to create fear. Anyway,
so it's it's like us and them.
Yes.
They are our enemy. So, it's like big words.
Big words.
That shape our mind and conception. What is it?
Yeah.
But I think the turning point was roughly it was a decade ago, when I was accepted to a program that's called Changemakers Exchange. It's Shock International, I think, responsible for this program. It's about change makers around the world in more than 100 countries around the world. And when I participated in this 4-day gathering, there was a Palestinian person there who sat next to me. And he said, nice to meet you. Who are you? What do you do? And so I told him I'm a social entrepreneur. And I told him a bit about my initiatives back then. And then I told him, what about you? And he told me, my name is Muhammad, and I'm from Gaza. I'm a social entrepreneur, just like you. And I was amazed. And I asked him, like, really? Are you a social entrepreneur? And he said, yeah. Why are you so surprised? And I told him, when I see news, so and Gazan people news, so I didn't know that you have like social problems, issues, difficulties. I thought it's all about the war. I said, yeah, of course, the war is like really a major thing, but we're people just like you. And it was like the first time that I met a Palestinian equally. And from this moment, it was a significant moment for me, because from this day, I just realized that I need to know the people that who consider to be like my enemies, but for me they are just like people, maybe behind the wall or behind the border.
Right.
Okay. And from this day, I just started submitting applications to every program I could, because I really wanted to know Palestinians. Right. Equally, I wanted to hear their stories.
Right. Can I share a story also?
Yeah,
I have like a similar experience, not similar, like different, but you reminded me of an experience that I once had when I was teaching at Bar Ilan for a while, Bar Ilan University, and that was the first time that I was with Palestinian women as colleagues. We were working together on similar issues, and we had a discussion about head covering, hair covering, and family. And she was sharing the story with me about how she was the first person in her family to stop covering her hair. And so I said, oh, I also had an experience of stopping to cover my hair. When I got married, I covered my hair, wore long skirts. I went with head covering for about 4 years, which doesn't sound like that long anymore. But, taking my head covering off was an event. It was a formative event for me, and it had a lot of other effects on me for years afterwards. And so we really shared that. We started really talking about that experience of being, in a religious family and wanting to find connection to your own body through religious rules and things like that. And it was also very similar. I'm just remembering the story while you're sharing about how when you discover someone who's meant to be so different from you, so other, where they've been your whole life, they've been cast as not like you at all, enemy. Really, the language of enemy is very strong. I was brought up very strong in that. The army also does a lot of that enemy stuff. And suddenly you realize, and even though we're from totally different religions, we really shared a very deep experience of what we went through. And that was also eye-opening that way. And what those experiences do is they break down all of that stuff. They break down all of that noise, the noise that's trying to make us see the other person as not human. And they remind us that we are all the same.
And I want to stretch out that, of course, there are people who want to harm us, okay? Like Palestinians who want to kill Israelis, like to murder Israelis. They don't want us to be here, etc., etc. By the way, we have the same from the Israeli side. Israelis, like a bunch of people who don't want the Palestinians to be here. Okay, so many times it can be mirrored, to each other. But I think the vast majority of the people just want to live. And I know that right now, after October 7th, especially after October 7th, it's so hard to believe that, like it's so hard to believe that there are normal people in Gaza, because you can all just hear on the news about families who host the hostages, etc., so you can hear all these terrible news, and there are people like that, but also there are many other people. So like my friend Muhammad, who, by the way, wrote me after October 7th that he's deeply sorry about what happened. He was shocked, and he sent his worries, and he hoped that me and my family are okay, etc., etc. So he was shocked about what Hamas did, and of course he doesn't support it. So of course there are, you can find like good and bad people, okay, or good and bad intentions in both sides. But I wanted to focus on people who want to speak with me or with us, with the Israelis. And I wanted to hear their stories. I want to hear it without the news. Because when I heard it from the news channels, it was just one-sided. And this is why when I heard Arabic, I was afraid. Because it's like a signal what it meant to me, okay? But now when I hear Arabic, it's like it can be like my friends again, because I went to so many programs. And the second after like I went to so many programs and I started to have also Palestinian friends, I saw that the reality is way more complicated than what we think it is. And I remember specifically one occasion after I was back from 2 seminars in Germany. 2 friends of mine asked me, how do you know about all these wonderful seminars and gatherings? Like, can you please update us as well? And I told them, do you know what? I will open a WhatsApp group. And when I will hear about more things like that, more opportunities to meet each other, so I will just put it there. I will post it there, and that's it. It will be like silent group. So that's it. I didn't imagine that much for this group. I think I was a bit lazy, okay, to update them one by one. So I thought it will be easier just to open a WhatsApp group and put there all the info.
More efficient, like you.
Yeah, more efficient than that. And I thought, okay, if I open this WhatsApp group, so more people can join as well, because it's the same. And actually today it's like almost 5 years since I opened this group, and there are
what's it called? That's the one that we talked.
Yeah, the Peace Opportunities WhatsApp group.
Peace Opportunities.
Yeah, there are more than 1,200 people, and I published over 300 opportunities to meet each other, because I just understood that the moment you meet the other side, I would say, okay, it doesn't matter if you're Palestinian who meet Israeli or vice versa, you cannot ignore the Israeli-Palestinian conflict any longer. I think this is what happened to me. If before that I could say like, it's not the right time to handle it. So after that, after I met Muhammad from Gaza, and after I met more friends from other places from the West Bank and from Gaza, but most of them from the West Bank, from East Jerusalem, etc., I just realized, okay, I cannot ignore the conflict and what is happening really under our nose, like under my nose. So it changed everything for me.
Wow, that's so interesting. So what kind of opportunities do you see? Like, do you feel like since October 7th there are more opportunities, less opportunities? Has something changed in the conversation since October 7th?
I think after October 7th there was silence. There was silence, like you couldn't hear about anything in the first few days. I think we all were shocked, Israelis and Palestinians, like peace activists from both sides. We all were shocked. I lost a friend of mine who was in the Nova Festival. He was murdered by Hamas. And a few days after that, I lost another friend of mine, a Palestinian friend, who was murdered by settlers. So I was in the middle of this crisis, and it was so hard for me. And I think what was the hardest thing is to understand that it's not either or. Either you are an Israeli, so you are with the Israelis and against all the Palestinians, or you are on the other side, so you are our enemy, you know? So, and I couldn't be just with one side, because I saw the complex situation.
That's really, I find the same thing. It's so polarized. You know, there's so little room for nuance. There's so little room to be able to say
complexity.
Yeah, to be able to say, I am distressed about the death and destruction and bloodshed and violence over here, and I'm also distressed by the death and destruction and bloodshed and violence over here. You know, it's like if you express sympathy for one group, that means you're anti the other group. And maybe this is something that women maybe bring to the table. Eva, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this also, about this idea of saying, what I am against is the violence and hatred and all the fear that goes with it, you know, not against an entire ethnic group. It's not about the ethnic group that I'm against. I'm against the violence. Eva, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much for your share. A couple of thoughts came while I was listening. one, I think what the event happened, and we try to avoid referring to October 7 because as if before that there was nothing, and so I prefer to refer to it as the event, the catalyst event that happened that day. I think it brought the conflict to the living room of Israelis. Mm. We've been able to ignore the occupation, ignore the conflict, what we call the conflict, ignore the crisis, while a whole population is under occupation and are not living equally. And so when this happened, it brought it to the living room of the Israeli, and suddenly everybody's awakened by like, oh, there's this situation. And I think it's really important to put that into context. I remember the first time I spoke Arabic in a workshop I was facilitating with my friend Dalit, from One Whole Piece as well. One of the participants, a high degree level army leader, cried. He's like, I've never heard Arabic in such a soft way. Mm. I've never heard it, and it touches my heart. I've always considered Palestinian as people I need to kill and protect myself and protect my family from. And I think this dehumanization is what Israel was created on. And that's the essence. And that's why it's so complex and intricate, because we haven't addressed up until now the root causes of the conflict, because we haven't even acknowledged that there is a conflict, that there were people on this land that Israel claimed to be hers. And so putting this into context, we had to build like a Truman Show. I call Israel a Truman Show. A Truman Show where we're going to ignore the context, and we're going to create a story, and we're going to rally people around that story. And based on that story, that's how people are going to behave. So I totally resonate with what you're saying. It's really about, it's not absolutely not either or. And it's all about knowing who the other person is, whether it's from the Palestinian side or the Israeli side. I have been facilitating weekly meeting since October 23, not October 7, end of October. And some of the people that come and share, they say, I never knew that an Israeli wants peace. Mm. A person from Gaza said, and then another person from Israel said, I didn't know that Palestinian wants peace.
We're all taught that. I hear that all the time.
Just this ignorance of like, do we really want the same thing? But we're wanting the same land. How can we live on the same land? If you want to call it Israel and I'm going to call it Palestine, and for me to have the whole land from the river to the sea, I need to kill you, and same on the other side. And I think what I call the solution is the field. It's the field of Rumi, out there beyond right doing and wrong doing. There's the field, and I'll meet you there. And I think in a way, what you're describing, you've been creating this field even before the events of October. You've been seeing this field since the first moment that you met that person that shifted your mindset. And you're like, oh, he's just like me, he's a social entrepreneur. And he happens to come from Gaza. He could have happened to come from, I don't know, Costa Rica, you know? Yeah. And I think that's really the key here. And the other aspect of it, and I think that's where we can inject women into it. And that's kind of the project that I've been facilitating for the past 20 years around women, gender issues, peace and security, is like, can we find what is common around us? What is common between us? And for you, what was common was being a social entrepreneur. It could have been being a woman. It could have been being a youth. It doesn't matter, but there is something that is common between us that can transcend the difference. So we can really understand what is common and transcend our difference and work maybe about our difference. And I think the key element in here is not that we need to be the same. I think we need to accept that we're radically different. And within these radical differences, we can still live together with a basic foundation that reject violence, extremism, hatred, and really trying to understand, what's your point of view? I'm really curious, and say for you. And I think that's where we can build a land for all, in a way, a land where we can all live in peace and harmony. And some people say, oh, this is utopia. It's not an utopia. It's actually, it's peace activation in action, I would say. I was really like, listening to you talking about peace activism. And I'm like, you're not a peace activist, you're a peace activator. Because activator is someone, it's a word that came to me in Burundi when I was working there 20 years ago. And they say, you're bringing peace, amahoro. And I think peace activation is about activating the triggers that don't allow us to have peace. You know, in psychology, we talk, we are activated when we are upset, when we are angry, when we're frustrated, then we are activated. Our whole system is activated and we need to deal with it. And I find that peace activism is actually turning into peace activation because we need to find the peace within us. To activate it within us. We need to deal with our own trigger, with our own fear, acknowledge, oh my God, I just heard Arabic and I feel scared.
Right.
Can I sit with this fear and still listen and meet that person that just spoke Arabic? That's a peace activator.
See,
For me, peace activism is not about fighting for peace, but actually for taking responsibility and ownership for I am going to bring the peace first within me, and then I'm going to meet the other.
So I really resonated with a lot of what you're saying. Some of it we've talked about already. But I really want to focus on this idea of finding the commonality as opposed to differences, because I do think that, you know, our political leaders do, as I said before, they very definitively and purposefully get us to fear the other and to fear difference. We're educated into that. I say we, I want to say I feel like I was also, you know, me personally was educated into fearing the other, and also growing up religious meant that you didn't only fear non-Jews, you felt people who weren't religious enough or people who were not religious at all. Like there were a lot of ways to cast people who weren't like you as people who you should not have anything to do with, who you should not relate to, who you should not interact with. You know, I was very specifically educated and socialized into that. And I think that a lot of our political structures also encourage that, not just the language. I mean, we know in the era that we're living in, we know that our political leaders use fear in order to retain their own power. I mean, it works. Fear works. That's a line actually from House of Cards, the way they said fear works. Fear works. Okay, fear works to keep the people in power still in power, to maintain differences, to get people angry and agitated. And so we're in we're in political structures that want to keep those differences. And also I would even argue that the Israeli political system also encourages differences. We're based on parties where every party is very specifically looking out for its own very narrow interest. And the idea of us having commonalities is so far from even, any kind of message anywhere. It's also embedded into our educational systems. Our educational systems are also very much around, there's the religious school, there's a not religious school, and there's the Arab school, and there's the Haredi school. And there is no concept of common humanity. It's also embedded into the way our cities are built. As we mentioned, also our cities in Israel are also built around separation and difference. There are exactly 7 mixed cities in Israel. And like we said, even those are not always even necessarily really mixed. So this idea of finding our common humanity is very far from anything that we're really experiencing. So I would say, and I've said this in other spaces where people people react the same way you said, which is oh, it will never work. There are too many differences. It's no, there are differences between people, but we've never tried in any meaningful way to actually emphasize our common humanity and our common values. And,
But more than that, I think the only thing that can break fear, it's just like a story, and to see the other person. This is why I put a lot of effort in meeting the other side. And sometimes it was extremely hard for me. They said a bunch of things that were so hard for me to carry, because I felt all this pressure on my shoulders, and I had many things to say as well. But the thing is that we need to acknowledge that for both sides, we had let's say okay, our past is significant and should be acknowledged. Okay, what happened to the Palestinians, or over all these years from the Nakba until today, these days, should be acknowledged by the Israelis, and vice versa. For the Palestinians also should acknowledge what happened since then until now, because we also had we got hurt by different things, and the last one was October 7th, but we had more terror attacks before that, etc. So we both should meet and talk about these issues, and do things together. So this is why, for me, stories, like I'm also a storyteller, so it's like a significant. I think it's the most ancient technique. It's just like to share stories. This is how people just connected and also could convey the knowledge from one generation to the other. So it was all through stories before the technology arrived. So also here, stories can create bridges and connect us, okay? Because when I have a person in front of me and not just like, I don't know, a number or just like a title, I could see him or her as a human being, and then I can connect. And I think there was a program that I participated 2 years ago that put a lot of effort in like stories. It's called New Story Leadership. And this program, generally for the people who don't know it, the program is in Washington, D.C., the U.S. It brings 5 Israelis and 5 Palestinians to the Capitol Hill to share our stories in front of senators and Congress members. So it has like a huge impact. And I was also in the Congressional Forum, by the way, with my 1.5-year-old son back then. Today is 3.5, because I wanted him to experience it, to meet Palestinians, to be in this area, so in the future he wouldn't be able to ignore it. And I wanted him to see that our generation, do everything that we can in order to end the occupation, to end this conflict, and to bring something else, to bring like prosperity to the region, and like equality to everyone, etc. So we do a lot. I know the word peace can be misleading, because maybe it sounds naive, okay? But I think the basic thing is that I want to live in harmony in my home. It's so basic, and but we cannot take it for granted because we cannot have it right now. So I just want to live peacefully, and I think right now, during this war, many people cannot imagine it any longer. Just how life can be boring, just like boring issues, and without opening the TV every day with more.
But do you think maybe the youth, do you think working with youth, the youth are more capable of stretching their brains and imagining things that are not possible? Because I think, the youth on the one hand are very, very traumatized. I mean, like the events of this past, I don't know, however long we're talking about here, these events have been very traumatizing for pretty much everybody on all sides of the conflict, which is, again, very worrying for me, what the long-term effects of that are. But also, young people have the ability to imagine possibilities that old, sometimes, I guess I'm categorizing myself as old a little bit, leaving that aside. But I'm saying that sort of like the older you get, the harder it is to stretch your brain sometimes. I'm wondering, maybe I'm over-stereotyping. I shouldn't be over-stereotyping.
I think you're right. I think also, I mentioned my dad before that. It was a significant person to me, rather than him being my dad. But for him, it was difficult for him to imagine that one day we would live in prosperity and in security here in this region, because he saw what's going on today. And, it's always it's always impossible until it's done, right? So there were so many conflicts around the world, they were dramatic, and no one could imagine that something else will appear, and then it stopped, and something else happened in South Africa, in Rwanda, also here, like with Egypt and with Jordan. Nowadays, of course, there is a war, but with Egypt and Jordan, there is nothing. There is silent.
Right.
And also they even helped us with the Iranian attacks.
Right. So, Jordan totally saved us, even though there were tensions. And before
that, the Egyptians were Egypt was the first enemy of Israel. Okay, we couldn't imagine. No one could imagine that we're going to have a peace agreement. Okay, right. So it is possible, and I think youth have this. Ability and beauty, like to see things differently and to imagine and to think big, because they can, right. and specifically nowadays. So in Peace Now, we had, like you mentioned before, like I'm a project director of a peace activism program. So we had we had 2 cohorts for young adults from 20 to 35. And the third one, we said, okay, right now we think we should have another cohort, but this time it should be for youth. And my colleagues told me, you're crazy. There are no youth that are going to arrive to this program. It's a lot during the wartime. No, maybe you should wait until the war will be over. But I think we don't have time to wait. So my team and I started looking for these unique people, unique teenagers who want to dedicate about 100 hours in 3 months. And be part of our program. And we just finished our third cohort a week ago or 2 weeks ago, and it was a wow.
Wow.
And it was a wow. I think I don't have enough words to emphasize. It gave me a lot of motivation and hope. And also I think many of our speakers who came to speak with them, they said, like, we came to give you knowledge and to give you inspiration, but if to say the truth, you gave me, or they said in plural, so they gave them this inspiration and hope, because if this is the next generation, okay.
Wow.
Yes.
That's amazing.
It's incredible. Some of them, they are 14, 15 years old with years of activism. Said, wow, where I was back then, I think I've been waiting. So they don't wait.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
I think that's a great example. I worked a lot with child soldiers in Liberia and West Africa, and I think at this age, as we say, our brain, the brain is malleable, and if we give it the good seed to plant, it can really flourish. And I think that's where I had one young boy, the son of my partner, 12 years old, that came to my Zoom meeting, and they were all adult, and he came wanting to prove me wrong. And he was saying, well, there's no Palestine. Palestinian didn't exist before. It just was created afterward, and you don't want peace, etc. And we were just like holding space for him to listen. But the amount of programmation at this age was so huge that for him, I was the only Palestinian he knew. So he wanted really to come with all the facts that he has learned. And I'm like, and my friend Dalit and I were like, we were just happy that I could be his sounding board. But I think if he would have met another 12 years old Palestinian and having more of this encounter like the one that you're talking about, I think that would shift a lot of the programmation, because it's like watching a movie about something and then you go and you see the reality and like, oh, this is the movie I watch, and it doesn't fit the reality. And then it's easier for you. It's adaptable and flexible enough in our brain to actually shift completely this perspective. And I think that's what we need right now. I mean, we needed it yesterday, but we need to continue doing it. And I think it's really innovative and courageous for you to do to do exactly that. I really
agree.
salute you.
I agree. And I think we're going to end on that note. It's been great talking to you. Before I sign off, I do want to just correct something that I said earlier, because I really did not mean to put down people of my own age as incapable of doing what young people are doing. We, over the over 50 set, let's say, are also fully capable of adapting our brains. And actually, a lot of the peace movements are full of, white-haired people like me. You see that a lot. Also, I think that if in youth your brain is malleable, and at this age, sometimes people become wiser and softer. That also sometimes happens, and you are sometimes ready to let go of things. So that happens too. Yeah. I don't want to. It's important to me to just say that, because I'm like anti-stereotypes in general, and I heard myself stereotyping, and I didn't like that. So
I think we should be like all. It doesn't matter like what is your age, but we should all be united towards this goal, this aim. To bring security to the region, to bring quiet. Some people would say peace, this word that disappeared over time, reconciliation, So we need to process a lot, but we just should keep in mind that there were so many wars in the past and so many conflicts that eventually were over. And people didn't believe that they will be over. That someday it will be quiet. I think this is like the vast majority of the examples are like a week or a month before that people thought like, okay, there is no way that we can finish it. And then suddenly one day, or with many organizations, a movement or something that happened over time.
A critical mass. We need a critical mass.
Yeah. And then we can get to the tipping point.
Yes. I think Eva has been in a lot of places like that. Eva's been to 22 conflict zones. Am I right?
Wow.
Yeah, and I went there because exactly people at that age, I dropped the Middle East conflict after the second Intifada, a shift just like you, because everybody was like, this is so complicated. And at the time I was in a meeting of Common Ground, bringing journalists from the region, talking about what is common between them and publishing article together. And when the second Intifada exploded, nobody was able to share stories anymore. And I'm like, if all the work you have done to date is not enabling you to create a shared story of like, how can we work together? Then I want to know how other people do that, how other conflict zones do that. And so I traveled, my first conflict zone was in Burundi, and from there, Great Lake region, West Africa, Southeast Asia, and many, many others. And for me, constantly, I was like, okay, so what is special about our conflict? And I learned nothing. There's nothing special about our conflict. It's just that the illusion and the fear-based programmation, so that we don't solve it, so that we perceive it as complicated, unsolvable, intractable, and that each side is stuck on its position. But it doesn't tackle the root causes of the conflict. Because when you speak with Jewish that were there before 48, or even with Palestinians before 48, they're like, we were living in peace. We didn't have an issue. We had some maybe issues of neighbors, but we didn't have a conflict. It happened in 1940, what led to the Nakba. So it started with this colonial project, the Zionist project, and then it extended. And so I think that what we can learn from other conflict zones is exactly this hope that each conflict has a solution. And actually, conflict, as we say in Chinese, is weiji. It's danger and opportunity. And it's bring together an opportunity. And I think what this whole situation brought both to Palestinian and Israeli is a great opportunity to be noble enemies and to raise consciousness for all of humanity. This is really my deep belief, that we are here as noble enemy so that humanity can witness what we're going through, and we can decide this will never happen again.
What do you say, Nofar, to that?
So I think maybe I can also, it can be also my ending note, that you can be either part of the problem or part of the solution.
Part of the solution.
And you should decide which place do you want to be? But for sure, at some point, this conflict is going to be ended. And then you need to know, okay, what I'm going to say to the next generation, on which side I was.
Which side of history?
Yeah.
Which side of history are you going to be?
Yeah, so I do it, first of all, for my son, Yali. Yes. So for his generation, hopefully, he wouldn't need to handle what I needed to do. And he wouldn't need to be part of a conflict zone, a conflict area. Hopefully. So again, just decide which side do you want to be.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Nofar. Thank you, Eva. Okay.
Thank you so much.
And amen to all of that. Okay. Bye.